everyone keeps asking the wrong question about Iran. It's not whether the opposition groups can overthrow the Islamic Republic. The real question is this: what happens if Iran's own military stops defending the regime? Because historically, that's how regimes fall. I'm a former Special Operations Tier 1 operative, a Farsi speaker and an Iranian subject matter expert, and for over 10 years I conducted intelligence operations against the Islamic Republic, the IRGC, and the Quds Force. When people talk about the fall of the Islamic Republic, most people are talking about outside forces. Sanctions, military strikes, and foreign governments. But historically, regimes rarely collapse due to outside pressure alone. They collapse when internal opposition movements and fractures inside the security forces happen at the same time. And Iran actually has several opposition groups, but each of them has strengths, weaknesses, and limitations that affect their ability to challenge the regime. They also struggle just to cooperate with one another, which further limits their ability to form a national unified front. Along Iran's western border are the Kurdish opposition groups. These groups have been fighting Iranian security forces for decades and maintain fighters largely based in Iraqi Kurdistan. They understand the mountainous terrain along Iran's western border, and they are capable of conducting guerrilla operations. But they face major limitations. They lack logistical support, manpower, and capabilities required to conduct sustained combat operations deep inside Iran. Because of that, their most realistic goal is not overthrowing the regime themselves. Instead, their greatest impact would be just simply applying pressure to the Islamic Republic as a whole, by forcing Tehran to divert security forces to the border, which would open a window for other opposition forces to take action somewhere else in the country. And this could even inspire other opposition groups to start to mobilize. In that sense, the Kurdish insurgency could be the first domino to fall in this conflict, triggering instability that spreads to other parts of Iran. But these Kurdish groups also struggle to cooperate with the other opposition factions. And many of the Kurdish groups advocate for autonomy and federalism, which creates suspicion with the other Iranians for fear of fragmentation of their country. In southeastern Iran, in the Baluch region, there are militant groups such as Jaish al-Adl. These groups operate along the Pakistani border and have conducted attacks against Iranian security forces. Their strength is geography. They operate in remote terrain, where the Iranian government struggles to maintain full control. But their limitation is scale. They represent a small minority population and are often portrayed by Tehran as extremist groups, and that limits their ability to gain support among the broader Iranian population. And they also face challenges cooperating with other opposition groups. Many of the movements in the Baluch area are Sunni, while Iran's population is overwhelmingly Shia, and these religious and ethnic differences only cause more barriers when it comes to cooperation. In the oil-rich province of Khuzestan in the southwestern Iran, there are Arab opposition groups, such as the Arab Struggle Movement for the Liberation of Abbas, and their strategic importance comes from geography. Khuzestan contains a large portion of Iran's oil infrastructure, but their limitation is numbers and the heavy security presence that is maintained by the Iranian government in the region. Like other ethnic opposition groups, their goals often involve autonomy and regional independence, and this creates suspicion among the other opposition factions that want a unified Iranian state. Another opposition group often discussed is the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, also known as the MEK. The MEK originally fought against the Shah and supported the revolution that overthrew the monarchy, but they later fell out with the Islamic Republic and went to war with the new regime. Their strength today is they remain highly organized and politically active internationally. However, their alliance with Saddam Hussein during the Iran-Iraq War still holds deep resentment among a lot of Iranians. Because of that history, the MEK is probably the most distrusted opposition group among all the Iranian factions, which makes cooperation with the other factions extremely difficult. There is also another opposition force that is often overlooked: the labor movement, particularly workers in the energy sector. Iran's economy depends heavily on oil and petrochemical production, which most is concentrated in provinces like Khuzestan. And workers in these industries have organized countless protests over the last 2 decades over wages, corruption, and just poor working conditions. Labor strikes can be extremely dangerous for an authoritarian regime because they directly target a government's ability to function. In Iran's case, that means disrupting oil production, petrochemical exports, and government revenue. During the revolution that toppled the Shah in 1979, the oil workers' strikes played a pivotal role in the weakening of that regime. When energy production stopped, the ability for the government to continue to finance itself collapsed. And the labor groups actually have a lot of things that the other opposition groups lack. They operate inside the country, and they involve large numbers of the Iranian people. And they are not tied to ethnic groups or regional identities. But they also face limitations. Labor groups are often decentralized and focused on economic demands and not political change. And the government often suppresses the labor organizers, either through arrest or intimidation. Finally, there are the political oppositions outside of the country. And one of the most visible and well-known is Reza Pahlavi, the son of the last Shah. His strength is symbolic leadership and support among the majority of the Iranian diaspora. And many Iranians see him as a potential figurehead for a secular and democratic Iran. And also, he has publicly stated that he has no wish to restore the monarchy or to be king. Instead, he has said he would serve only as a transitional leader, helping guide Iran through its democratic transition before handing power to a government chosen by the Iranian people. This position helps to reassure the other political movements that he is not seeking permanent power. However, he still faces limitations. He does not control a large organized political movement inside of Iran. And there are many activists and Iranians who are still skeptical of anybody who is connected to the former monarchy. This challenge of building trust between the different opposition groups has been debated for years by analysts who study Iran. Because without some level of coordination between these groups, even a widespread dissatisfaction inside the country does not automatically mean that will turn into a unified political movement. And this is where the broader strategic picture begins to emerge. None of these opposition groups by themselves have the strength to overthrow the Islamic Republic. What they can do is apply pressure on that system. Insurgencies all along the periphery of Iran will stretch the security forces. The civil protests will challenge legitimacy. Labor strengths constrain the economy, and political movements attempt to unify the opposition. But historically, regimes collapse when all these pressures and opposition groups are combined with something far more dangerous, which is fractures inside the security forces. And in Iran, that question centers on one organization above all else, the Artesh. The Artesh is Iran's regular military. It includes the army, the air force, the navy. The mission is defending the country itself, not the ideology of the Islamic Republic. And that distinction matters. Because unlike the Revolutionary Guard, the Artesh was never designed to be an ideological force. It is a professional national military. Iran also relies heavily on conscription. Most Iranian men are required to serve 2 years in the military. A majority of those conscripts serve in the regular army and not the Revolutionary Guard. That means many of the soldiers in the Artesh come from communities that have participated in these protests and these labor movements. They have families, friends, and even social ties to the same populations that they may be ordered to confront. And historically, this can create hesitation and a very important window. The branch of the Artesh that relies most heavily on conscription are the ground forces. These groups make up the largest parts of the Iranian military, and they are stationed throughout the country. Because many of these units are made up of largely short-term conscripts and not career soldiers, they are often considered not committed to the regime ideologically. But that doesn't mean they will automatically defect. But it does increase the likelihood of hesitation if they're ordered to suppress the civilian population. Another branch that the analysts often watch closely is the Air Force. Air Forces historically play a critical role during political upheavals. They consist of highly trained professional and strong professional identities. And Iran's Air Force carries an important historical memory. During the revolution that toppled the Shah in 1979, elements of the Air Force openly sided with the revolutionary movement. And that moment became one of the turning points that accelerated the fall of the monarchy. And because of that history, some analysts believe if the Iranian military was ever to fracture again, it's the Air Force that could be one of the earliest indications of that shift. But Iran's leadership within the Islamic Republic understood this risk. That is why after the revolution, they created a parallel force, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, also known as the IRGC. And the IRGC was designed specifically to protect the Islamic Revolution and to counterbalance the normal Iranian military. Unlike the Artesh, the IRGC is deeply ideological. It recruits heavily from its loyalist networks and maintains close ties to the political leadership in the Islamic Republic. It is also embedded heavily into Iran's economy, controlling major sectors ranging from construction to energy. Those political and financial interests gives the IRGC incentives to defend the system that gives it power. Then there is the Basij, which is a large volunteer militia connected to the IRGC. The besieged often serves as the regime's frontline force, suppressing protests and enforcing internal control. Together, these institutions create overlapping layers of security. The Artesh defends the country, the Revolutionary Guard protects the revolution, and the besieged helps to control the population. And each institution watches the others. Because Tehran understands something very clearly. Because the greatest threat to a regime rarely comes from outside forces. It comes from fractures within its own power structures. Historically, regimes collapse when three things happen at the same time, which are mass protests, elite political fractures, and parts of the military refusing orders. If the Artesh began siding with the Iranian people, the Revolutionary Guard would suddenly face a situation it was not designed to handle, and events could then move very quickly. Because when the system built to protect the regime stops believing in defending it, that is when regimes fall. If you found this analysis useful, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think is the most likely scenario for change in Iran? And if you'd like to help me support the channel even further and help me to continue producing deep dive content like this, you can become a member of the channel, or you can even make a donation. The link for that is available through my link tree, which is in my bio. And from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate all your support. Irani Azad.